Hey folks, today's show is brought to you by Blood Punch, a new film out tomorrow. Blood Punch is a crime movie and a love triangle and a supernatural thriller with a crazy twist. Plus, it's really funny and weird. It's an indie movie you should really check out, and it's available on iTunes and anywhere else you get video on demand. I've seen it. It's legitimately a ton of fun, and it's out September 1st. Blood Punch. Go get it now. Let's get to the show.
It's the Harris Football Podcast with your host, Christopher Harris.
All right. Okay. Welcome. Thank you very much for being here. I am Chris Harris. This is the Harris Football Podcast. A little slow getting started recording this morning because the lawnmowers are back. Had to wait for the neighbors to finish their manicure job. Well, here we are at the beginning of the last week of the preseason. I know from Twitter, at Harris Football, that a lot of you drafted this weekend. You know how I can tell? The number of "How'd I do" tweets are dramatically on the rise. If I could have an auto response to all the "How'd I do" emails and tweets that just consisted of a thumbs up emoji, I would totally do that. Anyway, so a couple other things that get sent our way time after time. First, why don't you publish the lists you talk about on the show? Why don't you print them somewhere where I can absorb them? I kind of would think that would be self-explanatory. Our business is to get people to listen to the show. But I hear you. Many of you are driving or at work or working out and can't be frantically scribbling down every time I say a name. So the solution we've come upon is join our Facebook fan page. Go to Facebook, search Harris Football Fan Page. Brian Wagers has promised to get all the preseason lists up on the fan page. So there is our compromise. And then I'm going to get a ton of emails saying, but I'm not on Facebook. And to you I say, meet me halfway, maybe make a dummy Facebook account. Just, understand that we're also kind of running a business as much as we do love our listeners. Second, many folks have asked why I'm not writing as many articles because they like to read my stuff, and they have for years. And I am flattered by that, and thank you very much for that compliment that many of you have sent me. The truth is, unfortunately, ads based on writing are not plentiful. They are not easy to sell, so it's not a very good business model. I don't make money when you click on harrisfootball.com, even if there are some banner ads on there. You have to have a huge volume to make it up, get any sort of revenue from banner ads on a website. But I am and will be doing some writing all year for Vice Sports. That's right, Vice Sports. You can see the first few pieces I've done for them already at vicesports.com. Even though it's not the same as my voluminous ESPN days, I'll have a couple written things every week up at Vice Sports. So there you go. Did you hear that? Did you hear that lawnmower?
Today's kickoff.
Today's show will be dedicated to decoding Week 3 of the preseason, better known as Dress Rehearsal Week. I'll talk about some ranks changes I made after watching Week 3, some injuries from Week 3, your emails and tweets, and, yes, your voicemails. And then John Paulsen of 4for4.com will come on this fine program and take a look at how Week 3 affected his outlook on various fantasy folks. There are only a few more preseason games to go before the regular season kicks off, and you could start the season by winning $2 million in Week 1 at DraftKings.com, America's favorite one-week fantasy football site. Several folks have tweeted to me asking if DraftKings is really good and if I really play, and I really actually do, and I did all last season. before the little podcast that could was even a twinkle in my eye. And if you've been thinking of trying daily fantasy sports, which you should because it's actually pretty fun and it's not a major time or financial investment, it's just a way to get a little extra juice on Sundays. Anyway, if you've been thinking of trying it this year, you'd be helping out the podcast by entering the promo code Harris. So go to DraftKings.com now and use promo code Harris to play free for a shot at $2 million in the Week 1 Millionaire Maker. Enter HARRIS for a free entry now at DraftKings.com. That's DraftKings.com.
It's time for Rankings Talk.
Thank you, Amber. It is indeed time for Rankings Talk. So, yeah, you know what my mantra is by now. I don't ever let myself get swayed solely by what players or coaches say. And I think that's pretty much still intact. And then I also don't want to totally start changing my opinions based on the nonsense we see that masquerades as preseason action. We have our opinions for a reason. They're hard-won opinions. Much research and film watching goes into them, and to change our entire strategy because Zach Zenner had a nice run, you know what I mean? But I also don't want to be inflexible. So here's an effort to right what I think are probably some wrongs from my earlier rankings without completely blowing up my draft boards. First off, I moved Steve Smith up quite a bit. He's now my number 39 Standard League wide receiver, number 43 in PPR, and that's way up from pretty far outside my top 50. So why did I do this? Partly, it's because some of my negative feelings about Smitty were related to Brashad Perryman, and Perryman's knee has kept him out of the entire Ravens training camp and preseason. You know, I still have faint hopes for Perriman as a late-round pick with some upside. I think he probably can be owned and benched in all leagues. But listen, someone's catching passes early in the year, and it sure looks like it won't be Perriman and probably will be Smith. His game against Washington this weekend, before he got kicked out of it for fighting, looked really good again. He looked like he did in the first half of last year. Now, he's 36, and he slowed down considerably at the end of last year, so I'm not all that optimistic for full season production, but it would be dumb to completely bury my head in the sand because he was explosive Saturday, and there's big opportunity in Baltimore. Speaking of Washington, the RG3 drama continues, and I can no longer ignore it. Right now, as of this morning, we've heard reports that Washington will start Kirk Cousins at quarterback, and RG3 will sit. I don't know that we know for sure whether that's related to performance or the concussion that RG3 suffered in week 2 of the preseason, but Bobby Three Sticks appears to be on the outs, and clearly I've had him ranked as a possible deep league sleeper, and that really doesn't even feel likely any longer. Week 1 is going to be Kirk Cousins. He's got a big arm, but not a great game sense. He still looks like a turnover machine to me. Colt McCoy is the third wheel there. Pop gun arm. There are no big winners here. I lowered RG3 outside of the top 30 quarterbacks. Clearly, that's where he belongs now. He just doesn't even seem like a sleeper, despite the running possibility he used to have. And I'm not going to put Cousins as much of a fantasy starter either. Obviously, we saw him produce, basically one huge fantasy day last season, but then the turnovers ensued, and I don't want any part of that. Maybe the more important question is, what does it do to the receiving weapons in Washington? Just a couple of weeks ago, I called Deshaun Jackson a flag player. I have to admit, this gives me pause with him. I'm still cool winding up with Jackson because now his average draft position is down to 71st overall, or basically almost a 7th rounder in a 12-team league. I still do have the flag planted for his weekly upside no matter who the quarterback is, but there's no use in being overly stubborn. So events are conspiring against this pass offense. Jackson has to drop out of my top 20 receivers. Again, still a flag guy, still value. If you drafted him this past weekend, you can curse my name, but only a little bit, because I still say I'm glad you got him, but I'm not as glad as I was. Some big late-breaking news out of Buffalo, where Fred Jackson, 34-year-old Fred Jackson, was a surprise cut on Monday morning, and that means you probably don't want Jackson at the moment, although my guess is, based on how he looked in Week 3 of the preseason, you may wind up reconsidering that at some point in the near future. What this tells us, I think, is that LaShawn McCoy's hamstring, probably okay for Week 1. I mean, you never can say he won't re-injure it, but my guess is now that he's looking okay for Week 1, and that Carlos Williams, the rookie who was a super deep sleeper of mine, also probably back from whatever was ailing him and likely to be the backup. So interested in Carlos Williams in more leagues than I was on Sunday, I'll tell you that right now. As for Fred Jackson, I do think there's something left. I don't think he's a full-time back. But, man, for me, by the time you hear this podcast, it's very possible he's landed somewhere. But for me, Dallas Cowboys just scream Fred Jackson. I would be very interested in him if he were a Cowboy, significantly more interested than if he were a Bill. He's, like I said, at age 34, I don't think he's a starting running back and probably not an every week starting fantasy option, but I think he's still got something left, and I really think the Cowboys could use someone, but so could other teams. I think Jackson will land somewhere. How much fantasy value he has depends on where he lands and who else is there. And finally, as talented as I think Gio Bernard is, it's time to start acknowledging that this Cincinnati backfield appears to be less of a platoon than I thought it would be. And if Gio is going to have a hard time pass protecting, as he's now done a few times in the preseason. Boy, come on, dude. Work with us here. You got to be able to stay on the field. Bernard was really good helping out with blocking in the past, but had rough patches on Saturday. Jeremy Hill, meanwhile, gets the goal line work as expected. Now Gio's starting to make me worry about third downs. Eventually, I think he gets it straightened out because the talent is there, but it's time to lower him outside my top 20 running backs. He's at number 26 now, though I acknowledge he has more upside in point per reception leagues. That quickness and make you miss open field ability is still there for Bernard. I still like him as a player, but I can't pretend that there aren't playing time concerns. Now, off the top of the show, I mentioned Blood Punch. It's from my buddy Eddie Gazillion, and it's available for download beginning on Tuesday. I hope you'll check it out. For a small-budget indie movie, Blood Punch does pack a wallop. It's got a great setup. It's got a really good twist that I didn't see coming. And you have to respect the indie movies, folks. Indie is where it's at. After all, you're listening to the little podcast that could, and we're as indie can be. Anyway, the best way you can help out Blood Punch is to order it now, even if you don't watch it right away. We're trying to help get Blood Punch to list high on the iTunes charts. It makes a big difference for an indie movie. So I hope you'll help it out. I really think you'll dig the movie in kind of a Memento, cool stuff gets revealed sort of way. And it would be awesome to see this little movie beat the big guys on the iTunes charts on Tuesday. That's Blood Punch. And thanks again.
Injury news.
Well, the fantasy world held its breath Saturday as another Packers receiver went down on the third play of the game. Randall Cobb slams his shoulder into the turf, and it looked bad, but apparently it's a sprained AC joint rather than a broken collarbone, which I think obviously qualifies as good news, even though it's not my shoulder. I'm assuming that Cobb is going to be ready for Week 1. We're not going to know that for sure for a while, but at the moment I'm leaving him where he is in my ranks. It's worth noting that Ty Montgomery appeared set to play ahead of Jeff Janis before Cobb got hurt, so he could have the inside track to the number 3 job without Jordy Nelson in the picture, though it was 3 plays, so we probably shouldn't draw too many conclusions, and Aaron Rodgers didn't even make an appearance. Duke Johnson, the Browns running back, suffered a concussion, and his Week 1 availability also unknown. The Browns' backfield figures to redo its frustration from last season, as nobody has really asserted himself as a good option behind what, in theory should be a pretty good offensive line. I'm still cool taking Duke Johnson in all leagues. I'm especially interested in him in a point per reception league, but it seems unlikely you're going to feel comfortable starting him week 1, even if he's active. I feel like I kind of know what Isaiah Crowell is. I touted him last year a lot, but I revisited his film this winter and felt a little less love for him. I think he's okay, but he's okay, as I've said in the past, in the way that Marion Barber and Rudy Johnson were okay. Like, in a good offense where they get a big workload, he could produce, but I don't think he's really special. I also feel like I know what Terrence West is, and I'm not a big fan. Johnson's the one who has some open field quicks to him, who might be able to make a few big plays every few weeks at least. But yeah, I mean, Josh McCown, Dwayne Bowe, Jim Dre, real hard to get excited about the Browns offense. My apologies to my listeners in Cleveland. Trey Mason looked pretty darn good, I thought, getting to the outside really quickly, cutting hard. And I was ready to tell you how impressed I was, but unfortunately he aggravated a hamstring injury that he'd been nursing for a while and had to come out of this weekend's game. The Rams say it's not a serious injury, and removing Mason was precautionary, so obviously we have to believe them because they said it. If you're interested in Mason, I think you're probably not having to draft him so highly that you have to start him. So even if there's a little bit of increased risk at the beginning of the year and Benny Cunningham might wind up being the week 1 starter, you still probably can take the chance on Mason because, he's either way likely to be on your fantasy bench at first until we see what his deal is, until we see, what Todd Gurley's deal is. As much as I love Gurley as a prospect, I think I've been lower than most folks on him just because I'm always skeptical when people are saying, rosy glowing things about major injuries. And so, my sense is that if Mason can get right in September, he could be the main guy in St. Louis. Andy Dalton came out of week 3 of the preseason with a neck injury, but that appeared to be precautionary too. The Steelers' kicking situation keeps getting messed up. We had Sweezum out for the season with a knee injury, and now apparently we've established that being the Steelers' kicker is like being the drummer from Spinal Tap. Garrett Hartley hurt a hamstring Saturday. Now he looks highly shaky for the season opener, and the Steelers have made a trade for a kicker. Josh Scobie, longtime Jacksonville Jaguar kicker, comes over. This could mean that Garrett Hartley is no longer in the picture if the injury is very severe, or maybe they just decided they want Scobie to be their guy. But, I think I'm probably going to let this settle a bit before I go wildly running in and adding Josh Scobie, even though we know that Steeler kicker situation has fantasy value for sure. But I think as these Steeler kickers keep dropping like flies, I'm going to wait for the curse to be lifted. I'm going to wait for the monkey's paw to be returned to its rightful owner before I invest. I should mention that outside of Carlos Williams, it continued to be a rough time for my super deep sleepers. Both Josh Robinson and Charkandrick West suffered concussions in week 3 of the preseason. Of course, we have to wait and find out whether that affects their respective chances of making their respective 53-man rosters. Hopefully they heal up quickly. And I also wanted to note one super deep sleeper addendum. I really was all set to list Gus Johnson as a super deep sleeper. He's an undrafted rookie out of Stephen F. Austin who's on the Cowboys roster. And given that I don't love Joseph Randle or Darren McFadden or Lance Dunbar, it's not impossible that someone like Johnson could rise up and become important at some point this year. The reason I didn't put Johnson on my SDS list is he'd suffered a shoulder injury the week before, and people were talking like it was a separated shoulder, and I didn't want the guy to get cut like a day after I picked him. Well, I still don't know if he's making the Cowboys' final roster, but I think it's pretty clear it wasn't a separated shoulder because he did return in week 3 of the preseason to get 5 carries. Just another name to put in the hopper if and when he starts making noise in the regular season. That's Gus Johnson, the football player, not the excitable announcer.
Time for the mailbag.
Hey guys, so I was at Jack Horner's pool party with my buddies Brock Landers and Chess Rockwell when I stumbled upon a man wearing footy pajamas who appeared to be in a deep sleep. As I approached him, he opened his eyes, looked at me, and said, "I am a writer, a doctor, a nuclear physicist, and a theoretical philosopher. But above all, I am a trash bag, a listlessly floating trash bag, just like you." I didn't know what to say, and before I knew it, he was gone. My buddies later informed me that the man in question was the gallant Christopher Harris, and that he was last seen checking into the Grand Budapest Hotel? Weird, right?
Yeah, weird. I was all like, ooh, Boogie Nights reference. Ooh, the Master reference. Ooh, Grand Budapest Hotel reference. If I'm picking my fantasy Anderson team, Paul Thomas goes way, way, way before Wes. I apologize to all you Wes fans out there. So let's see. Kelly Krieger, a longtime friend, she tweets that I was spotted ready to enjoy the 9th annual Pants Party draft in Scottsdale, Arizona, with a picture of me on the draft board. French Fry Phil also tweeted a photo, thought he saw my 77 Dodge Tradesman parked across the street from Chipotle, and the plate confirmed it, because he took a picture and the license plate was, in fact, a Massachusetts license plate. An email from Brian Yamaski. I ran across Christopher Harris at a video game conference. He was breaking down tape of Sonic the Hedgehog for a group of assembled gamers. He was raving about Sonic's spark rating, zero inertia explosiveness, supersonic straight line speed, and most importantly, his ability to mercilessly bowl over defenders. He then proceeded to excoriate Super Mario, calling him a trash bag with an overrated vertical leap. I left just as he started discussing his concerns about Pac-Man's inability to change direction quickly. Scott Burland sends a long email, and I'm going to read part of it. So I was in Paris on holiday and stopped by a bank to swap out some dollars for euros when a bunch of robbers wearing masks, toting automatic weapons, stormed the place, and a hostage situation ensued. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone of Chris's build carrying a large suitcase in which I could only surmise was elaborate safe-cracking instruments. I could only see the hair sticking out of the back of the mask, a similar color to our esteemed podcast host. It goes on for a while and ends, I hope that you have a doppelganger and were not part of a violent criminal gang. Please let me know. I'd be willing to win my leagues based on the advice of a petty offender, but felony murder is where I have to draw the line. Finally, Chad in Calgary sends an email. Hey Harris at harrisfootball.com. I'll be honest, sometimes I skip forward through the email section of the podcast. I guess I just didn't take it seriously. That was until I was at work yesterday when a masked man with red hair came up to me and threatened me if I ever missed the email section again. As he ran away, he kept yelling out, "Foster's a home run and Blue is a bust." Thanks, Harris. I'll never miss it again. Good advice. Good advice. Don't let that happen to you.
Today's guest.
And today's guest is John Paulsen. John, how are you?
I'm great, Chris. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. The lawnmowers have quieted. It feels
Nice.
like I'm home. You guys should be following John on Twitter. Please do. It's at 444_John, and it's the number 4. So number 444 underscore John. I'm glad you picked an easy one.
Yeah, that wasn't actually our Josh Moore is the owner of the site, and he doesn't even know what the genesis of that name was. So he came in, and it was built in 2000.
Yeah.
And he came in later on, and he doesn't even know what it's about. So it's just something we live with now.
Yeah. But so anyway, if anybody has a question about how to follow John based on the way I mangled his Twitter handle, I will tweet his name several times during the course of the day, and you should be following him. He's a really good guy and really smart, and that's why it's such an honor to have you on, my friend, and we are going to talk about week 3 in the preseason and whether stuff we saw changed our minds about anything. You know, there's such a temptation to... Actually, let me ask you that. Do you ever feel temptation to overreact to, you know, you've done months worth of thinking about your ranks and who you have where and things like that, and then you see it all beginning to crumble just a little bit in the dress rehearsal? How do you approach looking at week 3?
Well, there's certain situations. I would say the Dallas running back situation where I've made adjustments based on what's going on. I mean, Darren McFadden's healthy, and he looked better not last night, but the night before. I believe it was over Joseph Randall. And you know, a couple of reports came out about them going to committee, and they really liked McFadden, so I did adjust my rankings for that. But I mean, I've been playing fantasy for over 20 years now. I've seen preseason stars shine bright in August, and you know, come September they are on the practice squad. So I try not to get too excited or too hyped about anybody unless they're really in line to see a big role.
Right. Me too. Makes sense. And so let's start with a name who's not on the roster bubble, but somebody who has burst the bubble. Oh, the transition. Oh, the
beautiful
segue in my own sentence of fantasy owners for a couple years in a row, and that's Doug Martin. In this week 3, Doug Martin once again submitted a touchdown run that made me take a little bit of notice. It didn't feel like that was there for him over the past couple of years, whether he was hurt or had a much less effective offensive line. You know, if anybody's been listening to me for the past few years, you know that, you know, Doug Martin was a big point of pride for me in his rookie year. I kind of called that, and now it's been 2 years of yuck. I'm wondering if you're thinking about moving Martin up your draft board.
I have him at 26 in standard formats, a little bit
about where I
higher.
have him, yeah.
Yeah, I think I have a little higher in PPR. I've been moving him up steadily since he beat out Charles Sims, and he's had really a good offseason. I mean, all the buzz has been really positive, and I think they're saying he's had his best offseason. Dirk Ketter really fought for him to stay. I think that's pretty big deal to have your offensive coordinator behind you. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think Charles Sims showed anything as a rookie that really scares you. I think Bobby Rainey's actually a better runner at this point. But, I think, 5th round he's starting to go. And I actually saw him go in the 4th, and I think he went 312 in a draft I was in, Doug Martin. So, I mean, the hype train, once it gets going, it really can get going, especially a guy who's like a top 5 guy. Within a couple years ago, he was really good as a rookie. And, I mean, moving up a little bit, I don't feel super confident in that offensive line, but otherwise, I think he's a decent RB3 or late, low end RB2 if you wait on the running back position.
I'm with you on the RB3, like good RB3. I don't think I want to reach any further than that because the issue for me isn't talent when it comes to Martin. I've said a few times just in the past couple of years that if you line up everyone healthy, all the running backs in the league, I think he might be a top 5 talent. I'm extremely impressed with his size speed combo, his ability to cut. I think it's he can make multiple guys miss and then run over players. But he's not going to stay. How many times do we need to see it? I've been burned. I feel like I've got the singe marks to prove it. How many times are we going to? I haven't been tempted to continue to move him up beyond about where you have him. So don't get me wrong. I don't think your rank is wrong. But I can't go I can't go 3rd round. Oh my goodness. I can't go 4th round because I just feel like the leg injury is coming. The leg injury seems to always come for this guy.
Yeah, and I don't think the offensive line is great. I think it might be a little bit better than last year. I think there's a quarterback upgrade there that should help, but we don't know for sure.
That's right.
And I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic, but I think you're right, you're spot on there with the injuries.
Yeah. All right, so let's move to another running back. This is a rookie, a prospect who hasn't had a very good preseason, at least numbers-wise. I have to say that I didn't think his actual performance, watching it with my own eyeballs, was so bad. He had a few runs that were all right, but do you have concerns that Melvin Gordon hasn't submitted, Melvin Gordon-esque runs during the preseason?
Yeah, I think after the draft, I thought he was one of the guys landing in a great spot.
Yeah.
But with Danny Woodhead coming back, I think I'm pretty high on Woodhead, especially in PPR formats. Mm-hmm. I think you see Gordon on 1st and 2nd down. They want to run him. I mean, they drafted him early and want to use him, but I don't think he's going to immediately come in and be better on passing downs than Danny Woodhead, who's really adept at in the 2-minute drill, and on passing downs. So I think his PPR upside is limited, and he needs to run better, or they need to average a higher yards per carry for him to really produce the RB2 numbers where I have him ranked right now. But definitely a guy who's higher in standard than PPR.
So where do you have him among running backs in the standard?
I have him at 18 in standard, and he's just ahead of Arian Foster and Andre Ellington, and I'm not feeling that great about that, given the preseason. If he had been burning up, I think I'd be a little higher on him there. But 22 in PPR, just below Latavius Murray. I mean, I think that feels okay right now.
I have him higher in both, and you got to resist the urge. You see Danny Woodhead play a lot, and it totally makes me go. I have the temptation to overreact and say, all right, I have Melvin Gordon ahead of Frank Gore. I have him ahead of Lamar Miller and Latavius Murray and Justin Forsett. And boy, I'm clearly relying on a really good season, and we haven't seen it yet. And so there's like a dissonance there in your brains, right? You go, here I am thinking he's going to be great, hit the ground running, do everything Ryan Matthews was supposed to do if he could have stayed healthy, and then it just doesn't happen. How do you balance how do you balance the dissonance, even if it's not on, because you don't have a lot of dissonance on Gordon. You sort of you feel comfortable with where you rank him relative to how he's produced, but how do you, counsel our worrywart component of the audience?
Well, I mean, the guys you mentioned are all 3-down backs. So from a playing time standpoint, I don't think Gordon's going to have enough. And I just have always been a big fan of Woodhead. So coming into my projections process, I just assumed a pretty healthy role for Woody. And that just subsequently knocks down Gordon lower than some of my peers have ranked him. So, I think that they want to run. I think they want to use him, and that's good. And if he really gets going, I could see him coming in on some third downs. But I just don't think he's got the passing game experience to move Woodhead out of that role.
I'm just asking you, how do I not panic in general?
Well, if I were you, I'd move him down. But that's my only advice.
So to panic, go ahead.
Yeah,
Harris, you should be panicking. At point perception, I think you're right. I think I have him too high, and I probably will be lowering him just a bit this week. But boy, I look at all those other guys. I mean, Frank Gore's 107 years old, and he could be done. I mean, Lamar Miller has playing time concerns. Latavius Murray is on the Raiders. I just don't like running back is a crummy position. Have I ever mentioned that to you, John?
No, you haven't.
Running back is can we? And a lot of leagues want to get rid of kickers. Can we just get rid of running backs?
That's not a bad idea. It's unorthodox, but not a bad idea.
A good approach.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to have to think about Melvin Gordon, but of course you're supposed to stick to your guns. I mean, we do all this work, right? And we're supposed to stick to our guns, what we believe. The Falcons running back situation. Tevin Coleman finally gets a shot to actually play, and Devontae Freeman's still out with his hamstring injury. And from the very little action that Coleman saw, certainly he didn't do anything. Does Coleman? So we're talking about what did Week 3 do to our impressions. Coleman had a chance to take a step ahead of Freeman. It didn't seem like he did in terms of results, but just the fact that he was out there, does that advance him a little bit for you?
Yeah, I think with this situation, whenever a new regime drafts a guy, in running back position, I tend to favor them. But Freeman apparently led the entire offseason, and Coleman wasn't really able to surpass him, and then they both got hamstring injuries. This is, in drafting, all the drafts I've done in August, this is a situation I've really just stayed away from because it's so murky, and I don't really know what's going to happen. I think Freeman has the better ability in the passing game. I think Coleman probably sees more carries, but the other guy, Antone Smith, is maybe the highest point per touch fantasy point producer in the history of the league. So he's another guy that worries me.
Because he had like 7 touches, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his career stats, they're amazing.
Yeah, what a player that guy is. Of course, he's 30 and he's about as tall as your thigh, but
he's a big play guy, and they will get him a little bit involved. I think he's going to steal some touches, and if he stays healthy, it just causes more of a headache. So this is kind of a situation I've just stayed away from. What about you?
Well, I want Coleman to win the job, and so I was really looking forward to this game to see if he could sort of assert himself and make it a no-brainer, and he didn't. So that it sort of sends me right back down to where you are, which is I think there's value. It seems like there's always value in a running back in a Kyle Shanahan offense. I'm not trying to proclaim that Kyle Shanahan's like the second coming of the greatest play caller ever, but he does produce good running backs for fantasy, and I think someone's going to be that guy. I wanted Coleman to be that guy because, like you said, Freeman's smaller. He's more of a scat back type. He's more of a receiving back type, and Coleman's a little bigger, even though... What did you think of Coleman's coming out of Indiana? Did you view him... numbers were awesome. Did you view him as a great NFL prospect?
I thought that he landed in a good situation. They needed a running back, and he's got talent. I do the same kind of YouTube scouting that most people. I don't do all the draft Nick stuff,
right?
Because I feel like I get too bogged down in it, in my own opinion, and I'd rather have the team sort of decide the role for
that's fair
for me when I do my rankings, but.
But on YouTube, he was fast. You
yes,
on
YouTube, he looked really great. Especially the highlight videos where they only show his good plays. I think from a situational standpoint, I thought he'd come in and be the RB1 because just the way, I've seen this happen, 50 times over the course of the last 10 years where somebody drafts a running back and it's a competition for a while and then the second guy fades off but it just hasn't happened, and injuries sort of set things back. But I would think, that when I put money on a horse in a situation like this, I generally put it on the new guy that the regime picked. Yeah. Maybe they're just trying to keep him motivated. But I think this might be just a true committee where you have Freeman coming in on third downs and Coleman maybe handling the first couple downs, and it's going to be kind of ugly week to week to try to project this.
Yeah, it could be. I'm with you. Like the new guy and the bigger guy. It's like, that seems like the right. Anyway. But I'm with you. Neither can be considered anything close to a fantasy starter right now. Probably both need to be drafted and benched.
Wait on that.
Yeah, wait. But I think we're probably both in agreement that Coleman's the one we'd rather take the chance on if he falls to us.
Yes, and he's tends to go earlier, which that complicates matters because Freeman sometimes is around in the 10th, 11th round.
Right.
In PPR formats, that seems like a decent bet for the guy who's currently the RB1 and a better reception guy. Right. So yeah, it's kind of it's just a situation I've been avoiding, honestly.
Right, and it's frustrating because that offense could be good. Who knows? We always say that, and it never quite is. But the Denver backup running back situation. I wonder if seeing Monte Ball be so buried. This is a philosophical. It's both about the Broncos and a philosophical question. Again, like trying not to overreact, but trying not to stick our head in the sand. Right. Mm-hmm. So Monte Ball is now running behind everyone, running behind you and me on that Bronco depth chart, at least in preseason games, and. You can't go crazy every single time a guy doesn't get the playing time you want, but you also should not ignore the idea that they could be sending us a message about Ronnie Hillman and about Monte Ball, So how are you approaching the Bronco running back situation based on what we've seen in the preseason? And do you think C.J. Anderson has a handcuff?
I do. I think it's Hillman at this point, the way Hillman has played in the preseason. I read an article, I think it was the Denver Post yesterday. Ball just sounded despondent about this whole situation and, upset about he didn't know, clueless about why he wasn't getting the playing time. He's playing behind Thompson as well.
Right, Juwan Thompson, yeah. That's right.
I think Kubiak said that somebody there said that Thompson's role on special teams is a factor. So I kind of wonder if Ball's even going to be active on game day. I don't know that he's going to get cut, or he might get traded. Yeah. But if we're going into the season right now, I think it's Anderson. I think it's Hillman as a change of pace, and I think Thompson's that third running back because he's helps on special teams, and then Ball may or may not be active. And they might, keep him around in case of an injury because it is a high injury position and he does have talent. But I don't see a role for him on a week to week basis at the way that it's currently set up, the depth chart.
Yeah, I just want to be careful because I just feel like, again, they're telling us stuff, but maybe they're not telling us everything. But you're right. If Monte Ball himself seems despondent, that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
Would you view Hillman as a handcuff, though? Because it seems to me like we saw him in a starting role last year and he broke because he's little. And for me, I worry that, Anderson goes down or is benched or whatever, there's still going to be, whoever the big back is, there's still going to be a big back paired with Hillman.
Yeah, I wouldn't say he's a true handcuff, Hillman, because you wouldn't see him come in and carry the ball 20 times.
Right. Not a must
right.
draft if you draft Anderson.
Right. And he's going pretty late, but people are starting to get excited about him again.
Yeah.
And that's dangerous. I wouldn't go like 12th round. It's still good receivers and stuff available then.
He's a borderline top 100 player for me.
Yeah.
Which is, like borderline. Like you could take him in the top 100. You could take him just outside. But I think in a 12-team league, he can be drafted. But I don't think it's a handcuff situation. I really don't. I think Hillman could probably go anywhere and be, maybe a fill-in PPR guy.
Yeah, and I don't think he's a threat to Anderson either. So I think there's a lot of questions about that. Is C.J. Anderson safe? I think he is. I think Hillman might see that extra few carries as a change of pace guy, whereas we might have, if he hadn't come on in the preseason, we might have just seen Anderson like over and over and over again. But I still think Anderson's a first-round pick in that offense.
Yeah, close for me. I don't have him quite there, but I'm with you. This worked out about as well as it possibly could have for Anderson.
Yeah.
If Monte Ball has a good camp, has a good preseason, we're talking about, worrying about another big back.
Yeah.
All right, one more. Wonder if you can make anything out of the Titans running back situation.
Man.
It's not a good offense, but there could be value there. Bishop Sankey looked good for 2 straight preseason games, and then this week he went back to looking like 2014 Bishop Sankey. Did this performance pretty much douse any enthusiasm you might have been able to muster for him?
Well, I was admittedly high last year on Sankey coming in. I thought the role where he was drafted in the draft, and I thought the role that he was lined up for was going to be pretty significant. I think he was set back by the lack of off-season, OTAs and all that, due to his graduation responsibilities. He was late coming out. It didn't happen. It didn't materialize last year. I thought he looked good in spots. But I didn't come into this season thinking, okay, this is the year for Sankey. I thought maybe he might be a little bit better. Then they drafted David Cobb. I have them at 46 and 47 right now, PPR. So, even when we were in the early summer, they were talking about how this was going to be a committee regardless.
Yeah.
It looks like Wisenhunt. He did it in San Diego too. Split up the duties based on their specific skill sets. Dexter McCluster still has a role there, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So we've got at least 3 backs involved in this, and it's not a great offense. So this is another situation where I'm just steering clear of it. And if I were to take a flyer, it'd probably be on Cobb. Because he's a new guy,
Yeah, did you you didn't find yourself tempted by how Sankey looked in those 2 preseason games? He looked good, and they were against first team defenses.
I don't. I was starting to get a little bit optimistic about it, but not to the point where I'm going to be like,
you weren't
draft
moving
this
him.
guy, right? No,
yeah.
I would have to have some clarity there in the position. I just think this is going to be an ugly timeshare with no real clue going week to week who's going to get the most touches.
Well, John, thanks for doing this. Much appreciated. Folks should be following John on Twitter. It's at 4for4. The first and the third 4s are numerals. The middle 4 is FOR _JOHN. Oh my goodness. What are you doing to me here? But I will certainly tweet links to John's Twitter page. I hope people will follow him. He's got great info. He's a measured, non-go-crazy dude. I wanted to have him on for this particular show in particular because I know he's not going to overreact. And I hope you have a great start to the season, and maybe we could have you on again down the road, John.
This was great. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
And that is our show for a Monday. August has been a wonderful month for the podcast, and I hope September's even better. Thank you so much to everyone who's listened, and especially those who've subscribed. That is valuable to us. If you want to support the little podcast that could, please do subscribe, whether it's on iTunes or anywhere else you get podcasts. And you can also write reviews. We don't have a lot of reviews on Stitcher, so if you get the podcast on Stitcher, please write reviews there or on TuneIn or any Android podcast app. I'm sure there are areas where you can write reviews and give ratings, and they always help. Thank you very, very much. Tomorrow, JJ Zachariason will be on the program. We're going to talk about steady players whom you can pair with not-so-steady players in your fantasy draft. That'll be a lot of fun. Really looking forward to talking to JJ. In the meantime, I hope the rest of your day is great, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
The Harris Football Podcast's opening theme is Under the Gun by Apex Manor. The end theme is Tooth and Claw by OU Villain. Subscribe to the Harris Football Podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode.